Siddharth Zarabi, the managing editor of BTTV, now joins us. Ashish of Business Today also joins us on this broadcast. I want to first begin with Siddharth. Very grim news. The entire world of business has woken up to. He was only 62. He was touted to be the man with the Midas touch, and what a genius passes away at 62. How do you remember him?
Well, I would like to begin, Chaiti, by offering condolences to his family, his spouse and partner who stood behind him like a rock, Rekha, his other family members, including his cousin Amitabh Jhunjhunwala, and the millions of admirers for whom he represented the great Indian opportunity. I don't know how many people think about it. Why was he called the Big Bull, or like as you put it, India's Warren Buffett? Because he represents the India opportunity, the scope and possibilities that entrepreneurship have given to people in India. A person who came from a bureaucrat's family, a middle class family, starting out with just 5,000 rupees, and today a net worth of upwards of $5 billion, all in an arc of around 37 years or thereabout in the stock market. So in these 4 decades, Rakesh Jhunjhunwala had seen everything that was right and wrong with India's economy and growth story, because the markets are fundamentally interlinked with the economy. They have tracked India's growth. They have tracked even the pitfalls. They reflect the mood and sentiment. The Sensex and the Nifty, Chaiti, as you yourself would know, are perhaps the barometers of the potential and possibility of India's economy. And that's why Rakesh Jhunjhunwala was someone who youth looked up to. I remember hosting him at a very, very crowded Ask RJ session, a sort of masterclass on equities a few years back. The hall was jam-packed. This was the Bombay Stock Exchange auditorium. And with me was my colleague Abha. And I remember people just didn't take his autographs. People were there asking for him to bless their children and say, इसने अभी कॉमर्स पढ़ा है, आशीर्वाद दे दीजिए, कहता है नौकरी नहीं करूंगा, market में लगाऊंगा. And while there are many stereotypes and those cliches about the market and some of the negatives, what Rakesh Jhunjhunwala taught a lot of people was that you could be a good stock picker and picking the right stocks, and that reflects in his own portfolio that he has maintained, of which he himself admitted that there were times when he had
I do remember that Dalal Street used to always watch out for the stock that Rakesh Jhunjhunwala has ended up picking. I mean, that was the power of Rakesh Jhunjhunwala.
Absolutely. And one quick point that I also want to speak about as I hand it back to you, Chaiti, is that while there is a greed and fear index with respect to the markets, he made 2 things very, very clear. And he would say this every time in different words, in his own sort of style. He was in some ways very outspoken as well. There were 2 things he said. He said, getting 20% returns is the best that you can expect. So he used to tell people, don't get greedy, because this is one more sort of misnomer. And a lot of people get into the markets thinking, raat mein double kar denge. And he would always say, don't believe in that. And the second was patience. He would always say, the markets and investing, not just in equity, you could take that broadly across the personal finance, the save, invest, prosper kind of theme that we ourselves talk about so often. He would always say, patience is the biggest virtue for any sort of investment.
I do remember that, because he was always the one to discourage greed of speculators and always encourage the right investors for the right reasons as well. He was known to be a man with the Midas touch. Siddharth, continue to be with us right there. Rajdeep Sardesai is also joining us on the phone line on this broadcast. Rajdeep, first up, from all of us here at India Today, we'd like to go ahead and tell his grieving family many condolences on this bereavement. How do you remember Rakesh Jhunjhunwala?
Rakesh Jhunjhunwala was a one-of-a-kind, Chaiti. Outspoken, could even be seen by some of those who didn't know him as offensive when you first met him in terms of his blunt nature of some of his observations. But I think he was someone who saw the future. And he saw the future even in the mid-1980s when he first got into stockbroking. Interestingly, his father was an income tax commissioner and was hesitant to allow Rakesh. He always told me this, that my father never wanted me to even enter the stock market. But Rakesh eventually chose his own path at a time when very few people were willing to venture in the mid-1980s into the stock market. But as I said, he saw the future, and post-1991, I think he was someone who understood how the markets were going to move and was there for the long term. You know, he was not some kind of a short-term speculator, and that's what I think marked him out from the others. Even when we spoke at length a few months ago about his investment in airlines, he genuinely believed that India's passenger air traffic would quadruple over the next decade, and that's why he felt that India needed more airlines. It was, for him, not just a kind of a pet project in terms of fulfilling some lifestyle choice, but a shrewd business investment. So I think under that garb of being this blunt, outspoken individual was someone who was very calculating about his business choices, about his business decisions, and was always free, open to sharing his thoughts, very generous with his thoughts, his advice. I remember once asking him about my stock portfolio, which is very limited. And Rakesh then went into 10 minutes to explain to me what it meant to actually invest in a particular share. So he was very generous with his thoughts and was someone, as I said, was a trendsetter. You know, if you are in Mumbai today, there are a number of people who literally swear by stocks that Rakesh Jhunjhunwala bought. I mean, the moment Rakesh Jhunjhunwala bought a stock, people would believe that the stock would go up. So he had built that kind of equity among investors that Rakesh knew exactly where to invest. A real, in that sense, you know, a model for, you know, he became a sort of iconic figure for a younger India, which was now slowly embracing the equity cult. So when you look back at the last 30 years in the post-liberalization India, Rakesh Jhunjhunwala's story is one of the great stories of our time.
Of course, absolutely the greatest. And Rajdeep, while you were talking about his nature as well, if you could expand a little bit, you know, many at the first instance when they used to meet him used to feel that, okay, maybe he is rude, but he was rather a very straightforward person who used to always call a spade, Rajdeep.
Absolutely. You know, he was a great supporter, for example, of Prime Minister Modi. And I remember he and I once had a political discussion on it. And he said, please call me on your program. I will give you 10 reasons why I believe Prime Minister Modi is good for India. And there was someone in the room with us who was a critic of Modi. And Mr. Jhunjhunwala said, you know, call this person with me. We debate the issue. So he was, you know, more than happy to you know, put his political thoughts out there on the table, you know, ready for a joust with someone whose view he disagreed with. But I don't think it was ever done with malice. I think that's the important part. I don't think Rakesh ever, you know, sort of challenged someone out of malice. It was his belief, his conviction in what he saw the future. And, you know, he was never hesitant to speak up. He would make a, you know, very good debater, actually, because he was full of hard data. And as he claimed, even when he went into a particular stock, he always went on the basis of what he saw was hard information that he had. And in that sense, again, as I said, he became an iconic figure because at a time when the equity cult was, you know, just about beginning to grow, Rakesh was the one who was ahead of his time.
Absolutely. Rajdeep, continue to be there with us. I want to just bring in Siddharth Zarabi on this broadcast as well. Siddharth, you know, a lot has been spoken about Rakesh Jhunjhunwala, his Midas touch when it comes to the stock market. He's known to be the big bull. But, you know, many people often forget that he's one of the largest philanthropists in our country. The kind of donations that he's made to several foundations, NGOs, if you could expand further on the beautiful human being that he was.
Point. And he was the most reluctant to talk about it, but a lot of his money, his profits went into different social causes. And, you know, if I connect that with the other point about the entry into the aviation business, that had surprised some people because, as we know, the saying goes that what is the fastest way for a billionaire to become a millionaire is to invest in an airline, because it's a very tough business. But that was connected with his belief about the India growth opportunity. And Cheti, he passes away as we are celebrating 75 years of independence. He was just 62. Look at this country. The British left India abjectly poor in 1947. They left the country divided. So our country from that point, when there was mass poverty, is now aiming, hopefully, by 2047, when we complete 100 years of independence, to mass prosperity. And between that mass poverty to mass prosperity, as all Indians deserve, he epitomized this India growth opportunity and story. And he was, in some ways, very clear and passionate about the choices that he made. I remember investor calls where he, as an investor, as a large shareholder, public shareholder in many companies, would talk to the management after their financial results. And while much of it is technical, I still remember, without taking the names of those stocks, the kind of grilling that he would put them through. And that was him, because while ESG has now become fashionable, sustainable investing, not investing in companies that leave a large carbon footprint. I remember Mr. Jhunjhunwala used to make instinctive choices about this even before these became mainstream terms. So he was like someone who was a force of nature when he would talk about the markets. And Rajdeep spoke about several facets of his personality. I also remember the interaction that he did at the India Today conclave last year, and how passionately he spoke about India ka time aayega. And that was what connected him to the masses. He was not a reticent, media shy investor who wouldn't talk about it. He genuinely believed that he had benefited and he would like to share that.
No, absolutely. And, before I go to Ashish as well, so that one last bit, you've been in touch with him, close contact with him. What were his health issues like? Because now
much of that,
we wake up this morning to know that it was a serious health issue that he passed away.
Much of that is in the private domain, and we will perhaps wait for his family to talk about that in detail in terms of his health conditions. But yes, it was quite public that he had
no,
several
he was not visibly
health
well.
issues.
We respect that privacy, but he visibly was not looking well.
Absolutely. And in fact, one of his last public appearances was on a wheelchair. And Chetty, I just want to quickly add one more point. In the last less than 24 hours, in fact, just overnight and now, we have heard about the passing away of two great Indians when it comes to the financial markets. Let's also talk about Anshu Jain very briefly. Someone who went overseas, someone who also represented the middle class success story from India, a product of DPS RK Puram and SRCC, going on to head one of the most conservative and the largest financial powerhouses in the world, the German-based Deutsche Bank.
Yes.
And passing away at 59, his family has said, on account of struggling with and dealing with duodenal cancer for the last 5 years. So it's to me, and I met Mr. Jain also. He's a cousin of another famous Ajit Jain, the right-hand man, or as they say, the alternative to Warren Buffett, who runs Berkshire Hathaway. So I don't know. These things are not decided by mere mortals, but in the passing of these two financial greats,
stalwarts,
India has lost quite a bit, but I'm sure there are many more who will come forward in the days and weeks ahead.
Oh, yes, absolutely. Ashish Sharath is also joining us. Ashish, he just started Akasa Air. Thankfully, he got to see the pilot, the first flight of Akasa Air. He's not alive to see the rest of it now. What do you foresee would be the future of Akasa Air in terms of its operations, in terms of its day-to-day operations, in terms of going forward? Because Mr. Jhunjhunwala had a dream. He said it's not a low-cost airline, it's a very frugal airline, and he believed in the aviation story.
Yeah, hi. Before we talk about Akasa, I mean, I would just like to, spend a few moments on how on his whole journey on the stock markets. Like Rajdeep and Siddharth touched upon a lot of interesting yeah, anecdotes also. But if you see, I mean, this Rakesh Jhunjhunwala, born in 1916, Jhunjhunu from Rajasthan, he finished his CA in 1985, and if you see, just around, I mean, he took around, he was a CA by around 25 years. But if you just see around by 15, 20 years of age, he had already started looking at all these stock prices in the newspapers, and he has been investing the stock markets for over 40 years now. Now, Rajdeep and both Siddharth touched upon the point that his father was a bureaucrat. Now, there are quite a few interesting anecdotes. Now, if you look at his some of his very earlier interactions with the media, his father was a bureaucrat, and he used to make small investments in the stock markets as well. And when Rakesh told his father that he also wants to enter the stock markets, his father said that you already are a CA, you can get any, I mean, you can get a convenient job which pays around say 15, 20,000 per month. Why do you want to get into stock markets? But he never stopped Rakesh from getting into the stock markets. He said, if you want to go to the stock markets, you can, but there are a few conditions. I mean, these are very interesting anecdotes. He said that you cannot ask me for money, you cannot go to any of my friends for money. I'll extend all kind of support to you, but don't expect any financial help from me or my friends. But still, Rakesh Jhunjhunwala went ahead, entered the stock markets, and from a very early age, he had this habit of going through the newspapers, looking at the stock prices, balance sheets, and is always,
My
even if
colleague
you
Siddharth also wants to come in, Ashish. He has a question for you, Siddharth.
Ashish, that was a good point you spoke about his early years. I want you to tell our viewers, and we are obviously not recommending anything, but the Rakesh Jhunjhunwala stocks. And I believe that his stock picking was amongst the best that we have seen so far. He was the best stock picker, and there was a lot of conviction and there was a lot of risk that he used to take. That's why he was called the big bull. In terms of his stock choices, and since we are not recommending here, but in terms of his stock choices, Ashish, what do you see as someone who has tracked those individual stocks and his portfolio very closely, a portfolio that is perhaps worth over $5.5 billion now, Ashish?
So to start with, let me say a very almost a decade back in one of his media interactions, he made a comment saying, "Bhav Bhagwan hai, hum kadardan hai." I mean, that is one line sums up his approach to stock picking. He said that everything has to do with price, fundamental analysis. Like the point about that Rajdeep also made, that he was always focused on the fundamental analysis of a company balance sheets. He was the big bull, but it was not like he was just going by market sentiments. He used to do a lot of good analysis, and interestingly, there have been quite a few instances when he had got his bet wrong also. In fact,
Yes.
very early in his investing journey, he had invested in ACC. Now, ACC is I mean, again, a very well-known stock, and I very clearly remember he had said that he had sold ACC at around 3,000, 3,500, and within 6 to 8 months, the stock rallied to 10,000. And he was very comfortable or very open accepting it. He never said that, okay, fine, what I am doing is the only right thing. In fact, the point that Rajdeep made, that he was a very interesting participant in a debate. I myself have attended many a debates in which, or discussions in which Rakesh was there, and very respectfully used to say that we can agree to disagree. There were many stocks like Sesago was another
Ashish,
very interesting example. He took his first bet in Sesagoa at around 27, 28, and it moved to, I mean, more than doubled in just 6 months. So, and again, he had 2 or 3 reasons for betting on the stock, and they were all fundamental reasons. It was not like just because, say, the market is very bullish on power stocks or electricity stocks or mining stocks, and he just wants to get into those stocks. In fact, when the tech boom started, he was a bit slow in entering the technology stocks, because he said that, see, I don't understand, I am not able to comprehend this whole technology sector as such. But then he was a bit late in buying tech stocks, but he did enter those tech stocks also later. In 1989,
absolutely.
there was,
Absolutely, Ashish. That's one of the biggest strengths that Mr. Jhunjhunwala had. That was not going by sentiment, not going by the hawa, but going by the fundamentals of that company and as is said in the markets, bhav bhagwan che. Chaiti, handing it back to you as we talk about what will be his legacy, because come Tuesday when the stock markets open, it would be interesting to see how some of these stocks react as well.
No, that's going to be a very interesting one to watch out for. And as both of you gentlemen rightly pointed out, he was a man who worked on fundamentals. He was a true-blooded investor who worked on his intuition with thorough research. He backed the companies by their fundamentals as well. And he was one with a very, very big heart. One of the well-known philanthropists in Bombay. He didn't like to talk much about it, but unfortunately now he's passed away, and the entire nation today mourns the passing away of the legendary Rakesh Jhunjhunwala. We'll continue to get you more reactions. In the meanwhile, condolences to his entire family on the bereavement. I thank you, gentlemen, for taking the time out. With that, it's a wrap from me, Chaiti Narula, on this bulletin. Lots more coming up on the other side. Stay with us.
If you like the video, do like, comment, share and subscribe.